Driessen. I'm the Bee Biosecurity Officer with Agriculture Victoria, and today I'd like to take you through the Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice. Now, the Biosecurity Code of Practice, or the Code, was developed in consultation with beekeepers and government to provide a clear framework for Australian beekeepers to engage in best practice biosecurity. Now, you can see the principles on your slide right now, but in context of beekeeping, biosecurity can be defined as a set of preventative measures designed to reduce the risk of introduction and spread of pests and diseases in bees. And the principles of good beekeeping biosecurity describe the actions a beekeeper should take to minimize the impact of pests and diseases on their bees and the bees of other beekeepers. Now, pretty much, the code outlines what you should do to keep your bees healthy and help protect the Australian honeybee industry as a whole. It is not a manual on how to keep bees. The code tells beekeepers what they must achieve, but how they achieve it will be up to the individual and will be influenced by their situation. Now, some sections of the code are already mandated under existing state and territory legislations, but to achieve a consistent national approach to pest and disease prevention and control, all beekeepers need to be proactive in the management of their apiaries. So the code's kind of split into two sections, one part for all beekeepers, and there's a few extra parts for beekeepers who manage 50 or more hives. I would like you to write this website down, beaware.org.au. You'll be able to get a digital copy of the code, and you'll also get contact details of your bee biosecurity officers there. Now, let me take you through the 13 steps of the code. Now, the first, you must be registered. Now, it is absolutely essential that there is an up-to-date register of beekeepers and their contact details so that we can notify them quickly in the event of an emergency. If we ever have to deploy resources to combat an exotic disease outbreak or even a natural disaster like a bushfire. Now, up-to-date information on hive numbers also informs decisions on disease control and eradication around the country. Now, registration is compulsory in almost every state. We do encourage you to register your hives and talk to anyone you know who is not yet registered. Number 2, beekeepers must report notifiable diseases. Now, this requirement actually exists in every state and territory legislation, but it is included in the code to reinforce its very important obligation. The prompt reporting of notifiable diseases is absolutely essential for control and eradication. Now, the government also uses disease reporting to compile disease prevalence data, and that helps with supporting trade with interstate and overseas partners. Now, individual state and territories have different reporting requirements and/or even exemptions of reporting notifiable diseases, so all beekeepers must ensure that they're aware of what requirements comply to them. Now, if you cannot remember telephone numbers of apiary inspectors or who you need to call, just remember this number. If you ever find anything unusual in your hive, please call the Exotic Plant Pest Hotline on 1800 084 881. Number 3, hives must be regularly inspected for pests and diseases. Now, good biosecurity is a shared responsibility between all beekeepers, and all beekeepers have an obligation to take steps to minimize the risk of pest and disease spread, both within your apiaries and to other beekeepers' apiaries. Hence, you must regularly look for pests and diseases in your hives. Now, the code requires beekeepers to inspect their hives at least twice per year and keep accurate records of their findings. Now, this is a minimum requirement for good bee husbandry, and beekeepers are encouraged to inspect more frequently. The code also has a requirement that at least one hive in every apiary is examined at least twice per year for evidence of exotic mites, and on mainland Australia, the Baroola fly. Now, this test must be done using one of the following methods: drone uncapping, sugar shake, or alcohol wash. Now, as the code is being adopted in each state, it is important that you know all of the requirements in your individual state. For example, Victoria has already included the code in its legislation via the Livestock Disease Control Act, and it states that you must do drone uncapping with either a sugar shake test or an alcohol wash. So it's important that you find out what the requirements are within your state or territory. If Varroa destructor mite arrives in Australia, we will be the last major honey producing beekeeping country to get the mite. So it is absolutely imperative that you know how to look for the mite. The sugar shake is one of the easiest things to do. Make yourself a container, start practicing now. Early detection of exotic pests is absolutely essential. If Australia is to got any chance at eradicating an incursion, and if all beekeepers are actively looking for pests and diseases, together we will greatly enhance the national surveillance system. Number 4, beekeepers must control and eradicate pests and diseases and must manage weak hives. Now, if a beekeeper finds a pest or disease in their hive, they must take appropriate steps to manage its impact on the infected hive and also prevent its spread to other hives. Now, robber bees provide a major pathway for the spread of infectious disease, so maintaining strong hives is really important in as a preventative measure. Now, American foulbrood is the most significant bee disease that is already present in Australia, and it can have a devastating impact on individual apiaries. If AFB is detected, you really need to take immediate action by bee proofing the infected hive and contact your local apiary inspector and work with them on how to take action as soon as possible. Number 5, beekeepers must maintain records for biosecurity related actions and observations. Now, good record keeping is absolutely critical to good beekeeping and good biosecurity. It provides a record of actions that were undertaken, and accurate records are essential for tracing the source of disease outbreak. It is also important that records are made at or close to the time that the action or observations were being recorded. Now, the records required under this section of the code are all minimum. All beekeepers should keep biosecurity related actions and observations. And there are example templates for record keeping available on that beaware.org.au website that will help you with this requirement. Number 6, hives must be appropriately constructed and branded. Now, hives, and that includes swarm catch boxes, must be maintained in good condition to minimize the risk of disease spread. If bees can only enter and leave the hive through the entrance designed by the hive manufacturers, then that will assist bees to defend their hives from robber bees. So to facilitate hive inspections as required as part of this code, all hives must have removable combs, and that includes top bar hives. They are absolutely permitted, but only if the comb can be individually or separately removed from the hive for inspections. Now, this section also contains a requirement that all hives must be branded in accordance with your state or territory regulations. Branding is one of the simplest things that you can do. You can burn it, stencil it, paint it, endorse it, stamp it, carve it, etch it, whatever those figures and letters of your brand, as long as those letters, the symbols that make up your registered brand are clear and legible, and make sure that you find out the height requirement that your state or territory regulation requires. Whack it on the boxes. Number 7, beekeepers must not allow hives or appliances to become exposed or neglected. Now, it goes without saying, but allowing hives or appliances to become exposed or neglected is an offence in all states and territories. Robbing of exposed or neglected hives is a major pathway for the spread of pests and diseases, and this section is included in the code to reinforce the importance of the beekeeper's biosecurity obligations and the importance of properly caring for hives. The appropriate care of hives also means ensuring that your hives have readily access to suitable water. Number 8, beekeepers must allow their operation to be assessed. Now, all beekeepers are required to keep records, and beekeepers in charge of 50 or more hives are required to certify their compliance with this code annually. And all beekeepers may at some time or other have their records examined by a bee biosecurity officer or an authorised person to verify that this self-certification and beekeepers are required to cooperate with the assessment and make their records available. An examination could include the beekeeper's records, or a site visit, or looking at appliances and equipment. These assessments also focus on beekeepers in charge of 50 or more hives, but the requirement to make records available really does apply to all beekeepers, small or big. Beekeepers may be inspected if a serious breach of the code is suspected. Now, if you have 50 or more hives, then the next 5 steps requirements are for you. Now, the reason is commercial beekeepers are more likely to move hives around the country and move into areas of high bee density. And they pose a greater risk of disease spread to other commercial beekeepers, and hence it is appropriate that they should have a higher level of biosecurity. So for you, number 9, beekeepers need to demonstrate a minimum level of knowledge of pest and disease identification and management. Now, all people working with bees must know how to identify pests and diseases in their hive and must have an up-to-date knowledge on how to manage and detect pests and diseases. Now, this section of the code requires beekeepers who manage 50 or more hives to demonstrate that they have this knowledge by undertaking a formal assessment. And this assessment can be in the form of an online beekeeper biosecurity training and assessment program, or attending at an approved training course on the management of pests and diseases. Now, to make sure your knowledge is up to date, beekeepers will be required to recertify their knowledge by taking an online course or attending an approved training course at least once every 3 years. Now, while this section is only mandatory for beekeepers managing 50 or more hives, beekeepers with fewer hives are strongly encouraged to regularly undertake training in the identification and management of bee pests and diseases. Now you can see a picture on that slide there. That's the image of the online biosecurity training and assessment course. You might have known it called the BOLT course. It provides a very low-cost opportunity for beekeepers with smaller numbers of hives to regularly update their knowledge. And beekeepers with 50 or more can do that too. Number 10, beekeepers must have honey tested annually for American foulbrood. Now, as I said before, American foulbrood is the most widespread and significant bee disease in Australia, and early infections may be difficult to detect visually, and laboratory evaluations of honey for AFB spores remain the most sensitive and accurate test for detecting the disease. Now, laboratory testing may also detect AFB before it is even visible. Now, beekeepers with 50 or more hives must have an annual independent test for this disease. And doing a honey culture test will enable you to detect if the disease is present at a very low level. It also provides a snapshot of the level of AFB in different regional areas. Now, beekeepers are only required to have one test conducted on a pooled sample of honey collected from at least 20% of their hives. However, more extensive testing is recommended to assist with AFB detection and control. Regardless of how many hive numbers you have, all beekeepers, big and small, should monitor their apiary for AFB. So while this section of the code is only mandatory for beekeepers managing 50 or more hives, smaller beekeepers are strongly encouraged to regularly test their hives for the presence of AFB also. Number 11, nearly there. Additional information that beekeepers with 50 or more hives must provide annually. Now, this section details the additional information that you must provide each year to enable the assessment of your compliance with the code, and that includes a declaration from the beekeeper and their operation and management of the bees in the compliance with the code, including requirements where applicable for hive inspection, bee and pest management, record keeping, AFB testing and training and results. You must know that making a false declaration is actually a serious offence, and it may result in a fine or prosecution. So make sure you're following the code. Number 12. Now, this is a recommendation that apiary sites should be identified easily, and the identification of apiary sites with clear visible signage bearing contact details and phone numbers. It'll enable beekeepers to be contacted very quickly in the event of a natural disaster or emergency. Um, Although hives are identified in most jurisdictions with brands or registration numbers, it does not facilitate rapid contact with hive owners. This requirement is not mandatory, but all beekeepers are encouraged to comply. It does not apply to hives or swarm catch boxes that are located on a beekeeper's normal place of residence. And the last one. Beekeepers should maintain a barrier system for hive management. Now, a major spread of disease within an apiary happens, and even between other apiaries, is through the transfer of infected material prior to the disease and symptoms even being detected. And a barrier system is a process of dividing apiaries into smaller subunits so that there's no transfer of potentially infected material. Hence, hives and hive components from one subunit are not interchanged with those from another. Now, good record keeping and forward planning is absolutely essential, and all people working with those hives need to understand how that system works for it to be effective. But it is important to note that a barrier system does not stop you from getting the disease, but it will stop you from spreading it. I hope I've made it easier for you to understand the steps of the code of practice. By adopting the code as part of your daily beekeeping activities, you are helping ensure the future viability and sustainability of the Australian honeybee industry. So thank you.